roast beef cools off at all. With that being said, I guess that would be the call to order. So if you can, please rise for the flag salute. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. Our invocation this year, in honor of my recent visit to the Campbell version of Mecca, I went to Scotland and I came back with Robert Burns' famous Selkirk Grace. And that's something that he wrote in 1763, I think it was. Some hae meat and canna eat, and some would eat that want it, but we hae meat and we can eat. Say the Lord, be thanked. And in our prayers, let's remember tonight our commanding officer, Jeffrey Richter, who is recovering from his open heart surgery and bypass and everything else. He's over in West Trenton at the rehab. And let's also hold in our hearts our recently departed Gail Miller from the Demava, who was a tremendous friend of the foundation and of the militia, who passed away from comfort circumstances of her surgery in the last few days. So Gail and Jeff and everybody else, God be with us. Have your seats, folks, and I guess we can eat now. Okay. Let's go. Okay. Watch out for the stampede of so many. Night, really, in 1965, most of the Northeast United States, and New York City in particular, was blacked out by a massive electrical power failure. And I'm sure most people in this room remember that. It was pretty interesting. The TV channels were off. Nobody knew what was going on. We didn't know if it was Khrushchev or anything. Anyhow, it was a night that nobody wanted to have happen again, even though it proved to be a night of peace and great public cooperation. But 12 years later, in the middle of a long, hot summer in 1977, New York City had another blackout. And that time, the looters took over and wrecked the place. And they almost burned the city down. Was it because people had changed? Was it because the weather was different? Or was it because times were harder? Well, we'll never know. What we do know is things are usually better in the light than in the dark. So here this evening to share a little light on the goings-on with the State Militia Museum, we have Paul's Uncle Bill. So we have a hand for our guest speaker. There you go. Thanks, sir.
Thank you for the invitation to come and talk to you. When Paul asked me to speak, he invited me to the dinner and so forth, and I said to him, how long? And he said, well, it's 3 hours.
Oh, yeah.
Of course, he meant the dinner. And, so anyway, I have a couple things I want to do. One is give you a brief orientation on the National Guard Militia Museum. Second thing is to tell you a few vignettes about New Jersey's military heritage, because that's one of the reasons why the Militia Museum exists. It's to educate people about New Jersey's military heritage. And the third objective that I have is to finish talking before you finish listening. The Militia Museum was founded in 1980 at Seagirt. It was a used building out in the middle of Seagirt in the floodplain. And it was founded by Major General Menard, field artillery officer, who was the TAG at that time. The annex, which used to be in this armory, but now is in its own building in the back, was formed in 1998 by Major General Glazier, another field artillery officer, who was the TAG at the time. And he selected my brother, Paul's dad, as the first curator for the museum. He had just recently retired from the National Guard after 4 years of service and didn't have anything to do. So he made him the curator here. Now, of course, Seagirt is no longer in its old building, and we are no longer in the armory here. Mother Nature sort of created the situation for Seagirt's move because Sandy put 5 feet of water in the museum, so they ended up moving out of the floodplain into a refurbished building just outside the gate, the old Verizon building, which is just outside of the gate. The museum shares it with the ID card people in the National Guard. Our museum, we got booted out of the armory here because the brigade expanded. They needed more room, and so we moved out. Fortunately, they were able to get year-end funds from the federal government. It was one of those things, you can have a project for $1 million plus maybe 10–15% overrun that you have. And it's not a matter of what do I want in a building, it's what can I get for the money. And so architects design the building. It's pretty much an open warehouse configuration back there. You know, and it's like they said, do you want a fire suppression system? And, oh, that sounds like a good idea. What will it cost me? Well, you got to take 20 feet off the building. You know, so we ended up with a bare bones kind of building that looks like a warehouse, somewhat, which really had a lot to do with how the building was finally filled and designed. Both museums are open Monday through Friday. They're state employees who actually work in the museum, although the director of the museum is a federal employee. Seagirt is open from 10 to 3, Monday through Friday. Lawrenceville is normally open 9 to 3. And I say normally because the state employee who works there is out on sick leave right now. She just had knee surgery. So probably for the next couple of weeks, it won't be open during the week, except for Tuesday and Friday when the volunteers come in. This museum is also open on Saturdays. The volunteers come in and open it up, so it's open 10 to 3 every Saturday as well. The purpose of the museum, again, as I said, is to preserve New Jersey's military history, heritage, and edify people about that, and to tell the story of the citizen soldier, what he does, and the sacrifices he makes to do what he does, and then also to collect, preserve, and display artifacts that have particular significance to the Army National Guard, the Air National Guard, and the Navy Militia. So we're dealing with the citizen soldier. And of course the artifacts is the key to telling the story of what we're talking about. What kind of artifacts? Well, we've got the macros, which you see around this building and the other on the campus here. And actually out the window, you've got a Nike Ajax and a 105 howitzer and a PAC 75. So there's a lot of macro. There's also a lot of micro or smaller artifacts, small arms weapons, machine guns, mortars, uniforms, other military equipment, like backpacks and flak vests and all that sort of stuff. Personal equipment that soldiers have used throughout time, food that they eat, we'll have C rations, MREs, and stuff like that available. Maps, photographs, documents, and then display panels that we make up to illustrate aspects. When you walk into the museum over there, the first thing you're going to see is a horse, which represents Bucephalus, which was a horse that was stationed here at Lawrenceville with the 112th Field Artillery, which was a horse-drawn artillery unit. Bucephalus would only allow one guy to ride him, Lieutenant Jack Everhart, and would kick or bite anybody else that came near him. But anyway, when you go and you come in and you see that, you see the horse. There's a picture of the armory from 1929, which is about when it was built for the 112th Field Artillery, the horse-drawn artillery unit. And we try and emphasize just how important the horses were to folks at the time. Not only because they dragged the howitzers or the cannons on, but because they were used for polo, they were used for exercising. You know, a horse is not like a truck that can sit in the motor pool from one drill to the next and be left alone. The horse has got to be fed, he's got to be exercised, his stables have to be mucked out and all that sort of stuff. So guys used to come in the evening, weekends and stuff like that, bring a date, go out for a horse ride around Lawrence and so forth. And then of course they dragooned scouts. They had their own scout troop, and they would have 40 or 50 kids that would exercise the horses, clean out the stalls and stuff like that. So that's one thing you say. Then because we're in a warehouse, on another wall, which was a great big white wall, just plastic covering the insulation, we hung vinyl flags or reproduction flags, so to speak, on vinyl that deal with the National Guard, the different units of the National Guard, their crests, their flags that they carried with them, and also some back to the Civil War, which are sort of interesting because all the American flags back then were different. And that's because it wasn't until 1912 before there was any standardization on the field of stars. You know, the only requirements were the 13 stripes, red and white, and a star for each state. But they never said how the stars should be arranged. So however the flag manufacturer wanted to make the field, that's what it was. You know, it wasn't until President Taft laid out the criteria for stars before you see the standardization. On another wall in the museum, we've got the National Guard Heritage Gallery, which is about 80 pictures, which is U.S. Military History 101, essentially. It takes you from the first muster in 1636 up in Massachusetts, and then runs you through all of the National Guard experiences in the wars, and the Johnstown flood, and delivering the mail and stuff like that throughout their history. So if all you want to do is read a little history when you come in and see a picture, you could just spend an hour doing that, essentially, on your own. And then we have a small room that's dedicated to the tag. Now, this is one thing I don't understand. Why is it the tag?
Right. VIN number.
Yeah. Tag is the Adjutant General, so the Adjutant General. But anyway, we've got a small area there. We've got mannequins with the uniforms of Major General Menard. If any of you knew him, you know it was an atypical uniform. He wasn't an aviator, but he wore an aviator's jacket. And then we have also Major General Gerard, who was the first Air National Guard tag. As a captain during the Second World War, he was a P-51 fighter pilot. And in one mission, he shot down 4 German fighters and damaged the 5th. He ended up an ace throughout the rest of the war. He ended up shooting down 8 fighter planes. But he was an interesting interesting tag. And then we have a little bit of history on General Stryker, who was the longest serving tag, probably for about 30 years or so. And then we have the past couple of tags, which were history setters, basically. Major General Beale, who was the first African American as a tag, and then Major General Howe, Lisa Howe, who was the first female and also the first Asian American tag. Her grandfather was a Major General in Chiang Kai-shek's army. She's got an interesting history there. But she's also a surgeon.
Right.
So when she opened our museum here, she cut the ribbon. I figured, all right, what would be a good thing to have her use? We got bayonets, we've got swords and so forth. We used a scalpel from the Civil War for her to cut the ribbon to open the museum. So it was sort of interesting. And then we basically have a museum arranged in chronological order. You can either start in the colonial times and work your way around up to Afghanistan, or if you're contrary, you can start in Afghanistan and work your way back through history. But we use all different kinds of artifacts. In the American Revolutionary War area, we've got a map of New Jersey, which lists on it 600 battles and skirmishes that were fought within the confines of the colony. More than any other colony, which gives New Jersey the earned motto of being the crossroads of the Revolution. Of course, why is that? Why so many battles? Well, the Brits occupied New York City from 1776 until 1983 or 84, and they couldn't bring all their food in by ship, so they would raid into New Jersey and into Connecticut to steal cattle, forage and stuff like that. Well, every time they came across, they were met. Militiamen would ambush them. Sometimes the Continentals would come down. They had some pretty big battles in Springfield and other areas around there. When the Brits were in Philadelphia for the year in 1777-78, same thing. They raided across the Delaware into New Jersey, and there were conflicts there. And then, of course, the whole coast of New Jersey was open to the British Navy, so there were constant strifes there. And then probably one of the bigger reasons for so many battles is the populace was divided. About 1/3 of them advocatively supported the king, and then about 1/3 were revolutionaries, and they constantly battled each other. We also have some uniforms and reproduction weapons from the Revolutionary War period. We've got one New Jersey Continental who's got a Charleville musket, a French musket. It's a reproduction. And he's in the uniform that George Washington depicted or ordered that the New Jersey colonists wear. He wanted the red lapels, which the New Jersey militiamen had always worn before, to be worn by the southern states, and he changed New Jersey to the buff lapel on their blue uniform. The buff supposedly is what led to the color of the New Jersey flag when it was finally created when we became a state. We also have a uniform of a rifleman, basically a skirmisher. It's a white buckskin uniform, and the weapon he has is a Pennsylvania Dutch weapon. It's a 2-barreled rifle called a Winder, And the mannequin we have, the uniform, sort of depicts Timothy Murphy. Incidentally, the guy who donated most of the equipment, his name is Timothy Murphy, but he's no relationship to the guy this mannequin depicts. But Timothy Murphy was from New Jersey, was in a Pennsylvania regiment, and got recruited by Colonel Morgan, who had raised a rifle corps in Virginia and brought them up to New England. They were pretty much decimated during the battles in New York, so he had to recruit to fill his command, and he recruited a lot of people from New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Maryland. Timothy Murphy was one of these guys, and he allegedly, well, not allegedly, he's credited with killing Brigadier Frazier, who was leading a counterattack up in the Syracuse battles, the Battle of Freeman's Farm, with his Winder rifle at a distance of 300 yards, which was absolutely amazing at those times. Didn't get him on the first shot. It actually took 3 shots to get him. One over, one short, the third one right through the chest. And the 4th shot, he shot down the guy's adjutant. The end result was the British counterattack petered out. The Americans won the battle. Burgoyne ended up surrendering his army, and then the French recognized the United States. So there's an individual from New Jersey who made a pretty significant contribution. I'm going to skip a lot of stuff in order to keep the time down. I want to talk a little bit about World War I. We know when the American forces went overseas, the AEF, over to France, we had grown the Army tremendously, and we had nothing above a pistol or a rifle. You know, we didn't have any machine guns. We didn't have any mortars. We didn't have any artillery to speak of, no tanks, and no airplanes. And so we basically had to get all of those things from the Brits or the French in order to arm our soldiers. The interesting thing about that, we have 2 World War I machine guns on display. One is a German light machine gun, water-cooled, and then the other one is the French Hotchkiss. What's curious about that is the German machine gun is made under license from a Colonel Hiram Maxim, who was a colonel in the U.S. Army from Maine, invented a machine gun. The U.S. Army didn't want it, so he sold licenses to the Russians, who made the Maxim machine gun, to the Germans, who made this Spandau light machine gun, to the Brits, who made the Vickers and the Lewis machine gun using his design and his patent. So, what machine gun did the U.S. Army use? The Hotchkiss machine gun, which was a French machine gun. But Hotchkiss was a Midwestern United States guy, went over to France, formed his arms company, hired an American engineer, and built the Hotchkiss machine gun. Yeah, so all of the machine guns from World War I, basically American design. And of course, the Hotchkiss machine gun later on was purchased or license purchased by the Japanese, who made the Nambu machine gun, which the Americans got to see during the Second World War.
Browning wasn't in the midst in the Browning.
Browning's machine guns were excellent, but his first one was 1918, and then the second one was 1919.
There's like 2 later, right?
Yeah, I mean, you know, they were excellent machine guns, particularly the water-cooled, the heavy machine gun. Although, when you're talking about the Brownings, the light and the heavy has only to deal with weight, shot the same bullet. But yeah, his machine guns were excellent. and they lasted forever. The light machine gun, which was an air-cooled machine gun, was still in service. Well, the U.S. got rid of it in Vietnam, which you figure from 1918 to 1965. That's a long time. Yeah, it's a 30 caliber. And then other nations used it, even well after the U.S. got rid of it. So, the other aspect about two other aspects about World War I, when you're talking about weapons, the story is that the U.S. Army had rifles and pistols, but they really didn't have enough rifles. The Springfield rifle was the 1903 rifle, which was a direct copy of the Mauser without a license, by the way. So the Germans ended up suing us, won their court case, and we paid them back in lead, one bullet at a time. But anyway, the Springfield Arsenal couldn't make enough Springfield rifles to arm the Americans. So it just so happens there were 3 U.S. companies that were making Enfield rifles for the Brits, and they were just coming to the end of their contract in 1917. So the U.S. Army finally made a smart decision and said, okay, you guys keep making Enfields, but change the bore size so it shoots the same bullet that Springfield shoots. So they went from a 303 to a 30-06, 306. So they ended up with a rifle, and they were making 10,000 a day of these Enfields. So probably 2/3 of the AEF went to war with the Enfield rifle rather than the Springfield. And they lasted through the Second World War. They were used primarily for training in World War II, but they hung around for a while. The other interesting thing about the World War I is that's where the current regiments in the National Guard, the numbers and so forth, came from. The Army, they had a grand plan in creating the divisions in the Army, and 1 through 25 were regular Army divisions, 26 through 50 would be National Guard divisions, and then 51 through whatever it ends with, I think 108 was the highest one ever, would be National Army. And then, so the 1st Division would have 4 regiments, 1, 2, 3, and 4. 2nd Division had 5, 6, 7, and 8, and so forth. So New Jersey became part of the 29th Division, and that's 111th, 112th, 113th, and 114th Infantry Regiments.
Question.
11 and 12 are Virginia and Maryland, 13 and 14 were New Jersey. Yeah.
The Bloody Bucket from Pennsylvania, was that the 28th?
28th Division.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the same thing with the artillery. So the New Jersey artillery became the 112th. Let me just say something. I'm going back a little bit to the 1860s, 1870s, just because you're the Naval Militia. But one of the biggest artifacts they have in Seagirt is the Intelligent Whale. It's a submarine that was built in Newark in the late 1860s. Tried to sell it to the Navy. The Navy did not want it, didn't like it for some reason or another. And somehow or another that whale is moved between the Washington Naval Yard and Seagirt back and forth a couple of times. And somehow or another, the National Guard Militia Museum has that in their building.
So
it wasn't a traditional submarine, where you shoot a torpedo or something like that. The submarine would go underwater, stop near a ship, a diver would go out, attach a bomb to the ship, and then come back in.
Oh, like the turtle.
Yeah, very much like the turtle.
Yeah.
Just a quick aside, they think in the Rancocas Creek, they might have found another version of that.
No, it's a different submarine. That's the other thing about New Jersey and submarine warfare. The first submarine that the U.S. Navy built was the USS Alligator, which was made in Rancocas Creek, and then was adopted, brought into the Navy, but then it sunk being towed to Charleston. They've never found it. Never found the original one that was brought into the Navy. But
Just recently, I read they've done soundings and they've got something's an anomaly. I think might be it.
yeah. And
So
then
John
the other
Deere.
thing about New Jersey and submarines is the fact that John Holland is from New Jersey and worked out of New Jersey, and he sold the Navy the first modern submarine that it had. So pretty good significance. Jump into the Second World War. After the Normandy invasion, the U.S. Army had a tough time getting through what was known as hedgerow country. They knew the existence of hedgerows, but they just never realized how old they were, how strongly rooted into the ground they were. So when a tank ran up into it, it wouldn't go through it. It would basically go up, expose the soft underbody of the tank and get nailed. Well, it was a New Jersey guardsman who came up with the idea to defeat the hedgerows. He basically took the metal off of a roadblock that the Germans had put in, welded it to the front of his tank, an M5 Stuart, and then was able to drive through the hedgerows. He came up with the idea, he told his chain of command, and they said, no way, we're not gonna do that, nobody's gonna do it. Somehow or another, General Bradley heard about it. And then once he saw the demonstration, and he said, I want 6,000 tanks with this thing.
Like this, yeah.
Like that, And he said, oh, and by the way, don't tell the engineer corps. Don't get them involved in this at all. It'll slow down the process.
Right.
So they basically had
Excellent
local, maintenance units, guys that were used to welding and stuff like that, and they essentially did about 5,000 or 6,000 tanks within a period of a couple of weeks.
Was that a Jersey unit or just a
Well, Jersey Guardsmen in a Jersey unit.
Okay.
It was the 102nd, it was mechanized reconnaissance squadron. It's basically the 102nd Cavalry or the 102nd Armor. They kept going back and forth with the names. The last thing I want to tell you about is after World War II, all of the Jersey Guard units were reestablished. When they were brought home, they were all deactivated and dissolved. Guardsmen came back home, and in '46, the Guard was basically reestablished. The units came back, were put back together again with same nomenclatures and stuff like that, although they moved people around and so forth, and so you end up with, I think the 3rd of the 112th Field Artillery has got 2 of its batteries that were formed from the 114th Infantry. And so those 2 batteries get to wear streamers that infantry company, won during the Second World War. So it's a little weird or odd in that regard. But
I was in a unit like that in Germany, of the 9th Engineer Brigade, and they had won that medal in World War II. And as long as you were in that unit, you had the presidential and the.
Yeah. Anyway, during the whole Cold War, the Guard served pretty much as a strategic reserve. You know, they weren't deployed here and there. Every once in a while, a unit would, the maintenance unit in particular, would be deployed to Europe to go and maintain POMCUS stocks, you know, pre-positioned equipment and stuff like that. But pretty much the Guard just trained, got ready for war. Well, after 9/11, that all changed. There were too many commitments. The active Army couldn't meet them all, and so as a result, the Guard, you know, had to fill the slack. In New Jersey, in 2004, the DISCOM Division Support Command was deployed over to Iraq, along with the headquarters of the 42nd Division. And they actually commanded 4 brigades, 2 active Army and 2 National Guard brigades. They were there 2008. They went back to Iraq, basically were responsible for the Green Zone in Baghdad. They also had guys that were down in Guantanamo Bay. And then in 2017, they went over to Bosnia, had a headquarters there, and then they had units that were deployed to Jordan and Somalia. And then now there's about 1,500 guardsmen in Iraq, Syria, and Kuwait. They went over in March, and they'll be back probably in December or so.
What about Cyprus? Are they going to go through with that partnership?
Yeah.
Yeah, presently?
Well, the partnerships, they don't have anybody that are stationed over there. What it is, it's just a relationship that they establish. And every once in a while, you know, they'll send a unit over to Cyprus to train with their unit, or they'll bring their folks back here. Our other partner is Albania, and they've had, you know, that different, well, for example, they put a training team together, went and trained a whole bunch of Albanians on Russian artillery, and then took them over to Afghanistan and worked with the Afghan army, teaching them how to shoot the Russian artillery that they had lying all over the place. So it's a partnership in that regard. It's not like there's anybody that's permanently stationed over there. Well, that's basically it. In conclusion, you know where the museums are. You know when
I didn't
they're
know they
open.
moved out of here.
Say again?
I said, I'd been to this museum here. I didn't know you moved. I'll
Yeah.
go over and check that one out.
We had a field trip there one day.
Yeah, really good.
Yeah, the old
really
one.
good. The old
No, it's the new one.
Yeah, no,
Our
yeah.
unit, we went there for lunch one day
It
or
was
something.
about 8 months ago, something
Was
like
it?
that?
No, it was longer ago than that, I thought, but.
But yeah, it was,
Yeah,
it
but
was
we
a great
went there.
day out. It was
It was
really
pretty
good.
nice.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Hell of a
well,
collection.
we're constantly changing, you know, little bit at a time, and so forth, as we get new things and
Yeah.
so forth.
It's
So-
an impressive collection. It was really,
Yeah.
and well laid out. It was nice.
Do you remember which company was at the Princeton Armory in the 60s by any chance?
Uh,
I thought it was 50 Finance was what I remember, but nobody else seems to be able to remember that.
Well, there was a tank company in the
50.
Princeton Armory. One of our volunteers was a gun chief or a tank section chief with that unit. I mean, I thought the finance company was here.
50th.
In this, yeah, the 50th Finance was in this armory for a while, and it was down
And
in
went to the
Bordentown
airport.
for a while.
Yeah.
They moved constantly.
Yeah.
Gerald
But-
Dickinson was telling us that he actually remembers when they, in our present drill hall where we have the boats, he remembers seeing tanks in there being repaired.
Oh, I believe that. I just
Yeah.
remembered you guys being in the 50 Finance and saying they were at Princeton.
Yeah.
I don't know. Doesn't matter. As long
I
as
don't know. I know there was a tank company there because one of our guys one of our volunteers was there.
Well, interesting stuff. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
You know,
Good.
that's all right. You know, you talk about a lot of different inventions that make sense, and everybody says, well, let's do this, but then some bean counter or somebody says, well, we're not going to do it. And I don't know if you know the history at all of the Harris Hoff Manufacturing Company, but this is a story that I love. These guys were two brothers. One of them was blind, and the other one was, they were both really smart. They both went to MIT together, and they both graduated with honors. They graduated in the top 5 guys in their classes in the 1860s. And they did a lot of stuff, but they started a boat manufacturing company in Bristol, Rhode Island. And around the 1890 mark, they made a lot of sailboats. They defended the America's Cup 5 times. Nobody else has ever done that. But then they went into powercraft, and they developed. And back then, boats were running on naphtha. So they built this 86-foot patrol torpedo boat that they thought that the Navy ought to have. You know, we just came out of Spain or Cuba, and we're going into who knows what, the armed truce over in Europe, and things are getting exciting. These guys are businessmen, so they come up with this 86-footer that's going to have torpedoes on it, and it's going to be able to go like hell in all kinds of weather. And they understood that length over waterline is smoother and all this kind of stuff. And so they build this boat, and the Navy says, oh, we'll take a look at it, but here's our specs, and you have to do this and this and this and this. So these guys get the crap from the Navy, and that means they've got to dumb down their ship and their design. They've got to make it worse for the Navy. So the Navy sends their guys up from Washington when the boat's done for the first test ride. And Harris Hoff says, well, we took your design, but we improved this, this, and this. The Navy guy says, we're not even going to look at it if you aren't right on spec. So Harris Hoff works all night long, and he makes the boat stupid, so the Navy guys will like it. Takes them out in the Narragansett Bay, knows that there's some really bad weather rolling up from the ocean. Gets them 50 miles way out in the ocean, and the thing conks out. And the Navy guys are flipping out. It's like, Jesus Christ, what are we going to do now? Wait a minute, I'll fix it. And he goes downstairs, and he's got the parts for the improvements. Puts it back in, runs them back up the Narragansett Bay at like 30 miles an hour in 1895. The Navy guy says, this is great. We'll take 10 of them right now. The hell you will. And he sold it to England. I'm done with you guys. And he wouldn't have anything to do. Harris Hoff Manufacturing Company didn't have anything else to do with the United States Navy until 1942, and then they started building destroyers. But anyway, so it's an old story. Well, thank you very much for coming out. I think now it's time for our 2-bell ceremony, and then we will let everybody cut loose and get out of here. Oh, we left. Oh, there's Mr. Moran's. No, just have a seat.
Before I go into the 2-bell ceremony, keeping with the theme of history, I came up with about the history of the bell. Right? Bells have a century-long tradition of varied use in navies and merchant fleets of the world. They have been used for signings, keeping time, and providing alarms. Their functional and ceremonial uses have made them a symbol of considerable significance to the United States Navy. American ships of the Revolutionary War in our early days as a nation adopted many of the practices and traditions of the British Navy, including the use of bells. In 1798, Paul Revere cast a bell weighing 242 pounds for the frigate Constitution, also known today by its old nickname is Ironside. In the past days, 2 bells marked the end of a routine day aboard a ship. It was also the time for tattoo, with the signals of drums, bugles, or trumpets for soldiers or sailors to return to their quarters, and soon taps would sound throughout the ship. But on keeping with the history of the ship's bells, as I said before, bells have been used for century-long tradition in various navies and merchant fleets around the world, signaling time, sounding alarms, and important in the ship's routine of readiness. Their functional and ceremonial uses have made them a symbol of considerable significance to the United States Navy. Bells cast from the original were originally developed in the Bronze Age, achieving a particular high level of sophistication in China. During the European Middle Ages, they were used by Christians to signify divine services and to make special announcements. Christians and Buddhist monasteries historically historically used them to regulate daily activities, conceptually similar to the timekeeping of the U.S. Navy. The Catholics considered bells of a representation of the voice of God and of paradise. One of the earliest records of mention of the shipboard bell was on a British ship called, Ken, you can help me out here, Grace D-I-E-U?
Yeah, it's
Right?
Grace of God.
grace of God.
Grace of God, about 1485, right? Some 10 years later, an inventory of the British ship's region revealed that the ship carried 2 watch bells. Let's see. Before the advent of chronometers, times at seas were measured by trickles of sand through a half an hour glass. One of the ship boys had the duty of watching the glass and turning it over at the end before it had run out. When he turned the glass over, he struck the bell as a signal that had performed its visual function. From this ringing of the bells of the glass was turned into the tradition of striking the bell once at the end of the first half hour and of a 4-hour watch, twice after the first hour. 8 bells marked the end of the 4-hour watch. This process was repeated in the succeeding watches. The age-old practice of sounding the bell on the hour and a half hour has its place in the nuclear and missile-oriented United States Navy at the dawn of the 21st century, regular daily routines as it had did in the historic vessels under the sail in late 18th century. And that is just part of the history of bell. Even the ancient Egyptians didn't use bells.
Well, they didn't have Paul Revere.
No, they didn't. The 2-bell ceremony. On the table sits a red rose to signify the blood our fallen shipmates shed. A crystal glass of water to quench their thirst for freedom. Salt to remind us of the pain that they felt, lest we forget them. The china is bone white, as the purity of their hearts and their sacrifices. This and a white linen tablecloth that could be used as a clean bandage for their wounds. We take this time to remember them. The place we set for them this evening is a special place, as a place we hold for them in our hearts, our minds, and our Navy. In days past, 2 bells marked the end of the routine day aboard a ship. It was time for tattoo, and soon taps would sound throughout the ship. Certainly, this is the most appropriate time to honor our departed shipmates. Ladies and gentlemen, would you please bow your heads? The toll of the ship bell reminds us of the reverence we owe to our departed shipmates. To those who guard our country upon the sea, in the air, and on foreign soil. Let it be a reminder of our faith that you find in us. Let us also gather here not to forget our obligations and in silence breathe a prayer for our absent shipmates. Let us offer a prayer for our departed shipmates. This moment of reverence is dedicated to the memory of our shipmates who have gone before us and are now serving on the staff of the Supreme Commander.
That concludes the festivities this evening. Thank you, everybody, for coming out. there's more food, don't let it go to waste. Take a plate. Thank you, Mr. Cal, very much for coming out. Thank you, Mr. Paul, for inviting your own. Interesting stuff indeed.